The New York Giants barely touched their inside linebacker unit this past offseason. We'll take a look at why that is and what we can expect from the group coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. All right, Giant fans, we're continuing our look at the New York Giants position groups, the position unit groups. And today we're going to take a look at the inside linebackers group. Now, the inside linebackers, really not much was added to that group outside of maybe special teams candidates. So I went in as usual and I took a look at the performance issues, any hidden numbers and whatnot. And overall, I've got to say the inside linebackers, based on the data that I was able to pull, not too bad, which is probably why that group wasn't a high priority in terms of adding bodies to that. But we're going to talk about that in segment 2. For segment 1, we're going to just do an overview. And then in segment 3, we'll take a look at some of the questions surrounding the unit group. All right, let's get things started. Now, I mentioned the Giants really didn't add to the inside linebacker group. And I'm not counting Chris Ford, who's more or less a special teamer, or Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, who's also a special teamer. I'm talking about main depth. So you have basically the same starters returning from last year: Bobby Okereke, Micah McFaden. You have Darius Mawaso, who filled in and provided depth at the position he's returning, and Deontay Johnson, who last summer looked pretty good in training camp and might have been on his way to getting a roster spot until, of course, unfortunately, he suffered a high ankle sprain, which landed him on IR for the majority of the season. So the Giants really didn't add to the group. And I mentioned this because there was some talk in the offseason that the Giants might move on from Bobby Okereke. I never thought that that was going to happen, but there were some people that thought maybe that they would, given that Okereke's guaranteed money was running out, given that he had a down year last year, even though it was partly because he was injured. And then, of course, also because Micah McFaden is entering a contract year. So the thinking was, well, maybe the Giants would add a depth piece, either in the draft or somewhere along the line, to just have them ready in case, they decided to go in a different direction from last year. But in looking at this group, I'm going to mention him quite a bit in this show, but Abdul Carter could be a reason why the Giants are kind of running it back with what they have. Now, as we know, Abdul Carter is primarily an outside linebacker, but at Penn State, he played a little bit of inside linebacker. So there is a possibility that maybe as the summer goes on, preseason goes on, we might see Abdul Carter in some inside linebacker snaps. All right. So it's almost like the Giants got 2 for 1 in terms of Abdul Carter, a guy who can play outside and who will probably primarily play outside. And of course, a guy who can play inside, something that he did in college. He was pretty good at it too before he switched to outside primarily last year, his final year of college eligibility. So that could be one of the reasons why the Giants really didn't beef up the inside linebacker position. Now, a lot of people look at the inside linebackers for the Giants last year and they say, they weren't really as impactful. They didn't really make, any splash plays. They weren't as productive. Bobby Okereke failed to reach 100 tackles, fell short by 7, I believe, for the first time in 3 years. not a big deal considering Bobby Okereke had a shortened season. I think if he had finished out the season, he would have hit 100 tackles. But we'll break down the individuals in the next segment. But I want to talk again about this inside linebacker group, really the least of the problems on the defense. All right. Now, yes, they were part of the run defense with problems. There were times when maybe guys weren't getting off blocks, but the problem I think was more up front with the defensive front really not, tying up blockers or being handled by solo blockers, except for Dexter Lawrence. So the inside linebackers, they just, for whatever the reason last year, they struggled to fill holes. And there were some times when maybe they were caught up in the wash. And here's the other factor to take into consideration. The Giants were working with a brand new defensive scheme last year. And you look at Okereke, for example, the first few games of the season, Okereke looked like a fish out of water. There were times when he didn't, it looked like he didn't know whether to drop into coverage or pursue or what to do. And as the season went on, he figured it out and he was better. But you wonder how much of the change in the defensive scheme had an effect on the inside linebackers. And truthfully, that might have had something to do with it. They needed to get used to the new scheme. But overall, as I will get to in the next segment, the inside linebackers really not that bad. And I'm going to look at the three main guys, Bobby Okereke, Micah McFaden, and Darius Mawaso. Again, they have other guys who can play inside linebacker. Chris Ward is one. Flanagan Fowles is another. But those guys are probably going to be more special teams than they are, contributing to the main defense. You might see Deontay Johnson, like I said, but primarily those are going to be the three guys to keep an eye on at inside linebacker, in addition to maybe seeing some snaps from Abdul Carter, who probably will get a few snaps at inside linebacker in certain packages, maybe in the defensive nickel package. So that being said, coming up, we're going to go through each of the main guys at inside linebacker, talk about their performances, and take a look at some deceiving stats that actually show that the unit isn't as bad as maybe some people thought it was to necessitate wanting to see a change. So that'll be right after this. Hey, Giant fans, summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel? Hey, it's never been a better time to get in. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if their first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. We've got two more units on defense to talk about. We've got safeties and cornerbacks. We will finish that up. And then next week on the Locked On Giants podcast, we are back to 5 days a week. So our little summer break comes to an end because, hey, we are getting so close to the start of training camp. It's going to be here before you know it. And once it does get here, you're going to get some bonus shows because when there's a practice, my intention is to bring you a training camp report. So lots to come here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's get back to our topic, the inside linebackers. We're going to break down each guy's performance last year, the concerns, and all that good stuff. So let's start with Bobby Okereke. Now, as I mentioned in the previous segment, Okereke saw his 3-year streak of 100-plus tackles snap last year. He had 93, all right? So he came close, and like I said, he probably would have topped that number, that 100-plus tackles, had he played a full season. Now, I also mentioned with Bobby Okereke that in the beginning of last season, it looked like he was lost a bit in that new defensive scheme. Like he wasn't sure what to do. But to his credit, when the second half of this season hit, he started to pick things up. He started to look a lot more comfortable. He had 36 of his tackles for the season from week 8 on until his season ended, right? His season ending because of a back issue. Now, one of the things that kind of stood out, and I guess, it's going to happen when you have as many snaps as he does. He did have 11 missed tackles, not the most on the team, and one less than he had the year before. But, missed tackles, something you want to clean up, obviously. You don't want to have double-digit missed tackles if you're a defender. So something I'm sure Bobby will work on because he's very meticulous and in tune with his game. But here's the thing. Bobby was also productive in other ways, right? His coverage abilities was a little bit higher, his coverage rating a little bit higher than what it had been last year, but he was still hands down the best coverage linebacker at the inside linebacker spot, and it wasn't even close. And in the last 2 seasons, Bobby Okereke has logged 17 tackles for a loss, right? So Okereke making quite a number of penetrating plays, dropping opposing offensive players for loss of yardage. And, I didn't break this down, but I remember doing this last year. Most of Bobby Okereke's tackles generally come within the box, before you get to that second level. So for the most part, he's pretty good with filling holes. He's pretty good with, being patient, keying up, taking the right angles and all that good stuff. And he's a playmaker. And I'll be honest with you, when I read about, how he wasn't sure if he was going to be back, there was concern, would they move on from him? I never once thought for a minute that the Giants would move on from Bobby Okereke. He's still a good player. He had injury issues last year. Yes. What the defensive scheme was different. Yes. But this past spring, I know I asked Bobby about, playing in year 2 in this system. And he talked about feeling a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident. So I expect Bobby Okereke to have a bounce back year this year. I think he's going to be the Bobby Okereke we saw in 2023 when he was just all over the place, making tackles, making plays, and just leading that defense because he is, as the middle linebacker, he is the quarterback of that defense. And I think that's the player we are going to see in 2025. All right, let's talk about Micah McFaden, who's kind of an interesting piece, if you will, in this group. Now, Micah McFaden, on the surface, you look at him and you say, well, he's not very good in coverage. The missed tackles. I think he led the team in missed tackles last year, second year in a row that he led the defense in missed tackles. But Micah McFaden actually was a lot better than I think a lot of people were willing to give him credit, right? So let's take a look at some of his stats. And this is from True Media. I went into True Media to get some of this data for you. All right. So from 2022 to 2024, the time that Micah McFaden has been with the team, he has accounted for 9.5% of the team tackles. He led the team last year with over 100 tackles. The year before, he was third on the team in tackles. He played 903 run defense snaps, had 171 total run tackles in that time. Again, that's the duration of his career, not last year, but the duration of his career. 90 of those 171 tackles are solo efforts. 18.9% of his run defense plays with a tackle. That's pretty good, near 20%. Over the last 3 seasons, he has had 16 tackles for a loss, 9 of which have come on first down for a 17.8% rate. Again, not bad at all. And in the red zone, he has 26 red zone tackles in the last 3 years. Now, remember, the first year, McFadden's first year, he wasn't really a starter. He didn't start until towards the end of his rookie season, and he showed enough flashes to where the following season he was inserted as a starter, and he did well with the opportunities. Now, again, the negative to Micah McFadden's game, coverage. He had 76 tackles in coverage. Just a lot of times with Micah, bad angles, just not getting there in time. That's something that needs to improve. But that's something that I suspect, and again, I'm going to mention Abdul Carter here, that I wonder if maybe on third down or obvious passing downs, maybe we see Abdul Carter in that role and Micah McFadden comes off the field. Something to keep an eye on this summer. All right, now, an area where I think Micah McFadden was vastly underrated was as a blitzer. He had 31 quarterback pressures on blitzes, 18.4%. Again, that's over the course of his career. Really good blitzer. But the negatives, again, the missed tackles, 46 over his career, which breaks down to 1 in every 39 snaps. So you figure if a defense is playing 60 snaps or 60 plays a game, rather, yeah, that's 2 a game, roughly. So that needs to be improved. All right. Last year, he had a career high 16 missed tackles. And the coverage, like I said, not really his strong point. It wasn't horrible, but I think it could be better. And I think they're going to look for it to be better moving forward. So Micah McFadden, just spoiler alert, coming up in the next segment, one of the big questions is, should the Giants extend him? And we'll talk about that in the next segment. But first, I want to get to Darius Muaso, who is entering his second season. Now, Darius Muaso, when they drafted him, I think initially the plan for him was to basically be a special teamer. That was his bread and butter for the most part in college. That was something that they were attracted to. But Darius Muaso, when he came in, at first, he was a typical rookie. He looked a little bit lost and whatnot, but he settled in nicely and he actually played pretty well. All right. So he finished with 54 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, 1 quarterback hit, 1 interception, 1 pass breakup. Not too bad. And the beauty part of it is that was distributed almost evenly between run defense and pass coverage. 41 of his 54 tackles came in the last 5 games that he played, which, by the way, is when Okereke went down. So the Giants didn't really lose a whole lot when Okereke went down because Muaso came in and played decently. All right. He made quicker reads. He participated on special teams, which again was supposed to be his bread and butter. Muaso was a nice surprise, a nice development for the Giants on defense last year. And I think in year 2, he's going to be even better. So he gives them some nice backup depth in case Okereke or McFadden goes down. And if I'm not mistaken, I think last year at some point Muaso was even wearing the green dot, if I remember correctly. But really a nice development for the Giants. Muaso, a 6th-round pick last year, was supposed to be a special teams guy, stepped in and helped to keep the defense afloat as best as possible. All right, now I do want to mention real quick Deontay Johnson, who I think has the inside track if the Giants wanted to keep another guy for the defense, a 4th inside linebacker. Deontay Johnson last year in summer camp was flashing like crazy. Then the ankle injury happened, and then he kind of sat on IR because the season went down the tubes because, there wasn't a spot for him necessarily. They had to wait for something to open up. Deontay Johnson is a guy who I think is going to have an inside track for a role on this defense. I don't have enough data on him. I just, went back and looked at my notes from last summer, and I remember saying that, this guy had a really good chance of making the team. So if he is fully healthy, which he should be, he's going to compete. Now, the question becomes, do the Giants keep 4 or do they keep 5? I think Chris Board, as I mentioned, he's going to be kept. Special teams dynamo, who has basically finished like either 1st or 2nd on just about every team he's played on except for 2. So Chris Board's not going anywhere. He's an inside linebacker. So does it come down to Deontay Johnson versus Flanagan Fowles? That's a possibility. And that's something we need to see how that plays out. when we get to training camp. So we'll see how that goes in the coming weeks. All right, coming up next, some questions that I have about the inside linebacker group, questions that hopefully will be answered this summer, so don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. We are looking at the inside linebacker group. All right, and now the questions. And I kind of gave you one of the questions already about Deontay Johnson and will there be a role for him on this team, right? I don't know if the Giants are going to keep 4. Are they going to keep 5? I mean, the numbers is what you got to kind of have to work out. And oftentimes the numbers are influenced by injuries at another position. So if you need to keep, say, for example, an extra receiver because you got injury concerns, that means you have to steal from another position. So if they have to, Chris Ford can give them some snaps on defense if they need him to, but primarily special teams is going to be his thing. All right, so let's look at some of the other questions I have. I mentioned Abdul Carter. How much is he going to play at inside linebacker, if at all? The guy has done it before. He's good in coverage. Does Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, say, you know what, Micah, coverage isn't really your thing, so we're going to take you off the field on passing downs and put Carter in there? That's a possibility, something we're going to keep an eye on this summer. All right. Speaking of Micah McFaden, will the Giants look to extend him? Now, because of performance escalators, Micah McFadden's salary, his base salary, jumped up to $3.46 million. The Giants are going to need a little bit more cap space to get through the year. So does it make sense for them to extend Micah McFadden right now? Maybe give him, I don't know, a 3-year, $12 million deal, fold in some of that, convert some of that base salary that he's going to make, put that towards guaranteed money or a signing bonus so that he gets that up front and clear out some cap space. That's a possibility. But the only thing that I think might stop them from extending Micah McFadden, there's 2 things. And this is why I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but there's 2 things to keep an eye on here. Does Darius Muaso continue his development? I mean, you look at Darius Muaso, almost kind of identical to Micah McFadden in terms of skill set, size, and that sort of thing, speed and all that stuff. So do the Giants say, okay, you know what? We could probably get the same type of production from Muaso for a lot less since he's still on his rookie contract. And McFadden, maybe we let him go. All right. The other factor, like I said, is how much are they going to play Micah McFadden? Is he going to come off the field more in coverage situations? So that's all could be factors in determining whether or not he is extended. So I don't think the Giants will do anything with him right away. If they do extend him, and that's a big if, probably won't happen until the start of the season. Because again, they can get cap relief if they need it. All right. Just and also, like I said, extend a guy who really has played well for them the last, couple of years. So McFadden, considering he was a 5th round draft pick, he has really played, well. Not, I wouldn't put him in the upper echelons of the inside linebackers in the league, but for what the Giants have needed from him, he's delivered. And I also wouldn't dismiss him because, again, his stats, his production has been sneaky good in some areas. And there's no reason to think that won't fall by the wayside. So we'll see if the Giants do anything with his contract. Because remember, Joe Shane, typically when a player hits that performance escalator, he likes to, or he seeks to adjust it either through a pay cut or through an extension. To date, there really hasn't, there's been more pay cuts. Darius Slayton went through it. They tried to get Nick McLeod last year to go through it. He balked and, of course, got cut. I don't think the Giants will end up cutting Micah McFadden if they go to him and say, oh, you have to take a pay cut. I don't think they would be justified in asking him to take a pay cut. So to me, An extension would probably make the most sense, but do the Giants agree? That I can't say for sure. I'll see if I can't find that out as the summer goes on, what they really think of him. Got a list of things that I want to try and find out for you guys and gals. So we'll certainly see if that's one of them that I can get an answer for you. Of course, things can change, because it does take two sides to make a contract. And Micah McFaden might not want a contract extension now. He might say, you know what, I'm going to go out, play in my contract year, really drive up my price and see what happens. So a lot of factors, nothing is ever a slam dunk. I know some people say, well, why did the Giants sign this guy or whatnot? It takes two sides to make a contract. And sometimes the other side doesn't want to be interested in getting a deal done. But again, we'll see how it all plays out. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. For your next listen, please consider checking out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. Training camps are going to be here before you know it. And hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason and this preseason as they break down the moves around the league and the biggest storylines. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, we'll be back later this week with another episode of Locked On Giants. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon.